When you hear the name Borgia, you think of poison. You think of scandal, betrayal, and a Renaissance family dripping in blood. But that's just the tabloid gossip of history. Strip away the velvet robes and the papal decrees, and what you're really looking at is a hostile corporate takeover. It wasn't just a family dynasty. It was a financial empire built on extortion, monopoly, and the ultimate fake asset, salvation. When the Borgia Empire finally collapsed, it didn't just leave a vacuum in Rome. It proved that a system built on leverage, fear, and manufactured value is destined to implode. But the most dangerous part, the blueprint they created for absolute financial control, never died. If you were an everyday citizen in 15th century Italy, you were just a pawn. One day you're paying your taxes to a local lord. The next, a papal army is at your gates, funded by money printed out of thin air, seizing your land in the name of God. And the wealth wasn't going to the church. It was going straight into the pockets of a single family. The Borgia reign is often explained through complicated European politics, papal states, foreign alliances, dynastic wars. But cut through the historical jargon, and it's a very old story, a story of money and power unchecked and unaccountable. Let's rewind. In the late 1400s, the Catholic Church wasn't just a religion. It was Wall Street, the Federal Reserve, and the IRS all rolled into one. The church had a monopoly on the most valuable commodity in the world, the afterlife. And Rodrigo Borgia, who bought his way into becoming Pope Alexander VI, understood something the rest of the cardinals didn't. Faith is a product, the market is global, and he figured out how to monetize it at an industrial scale. Enter simony, a simple idea, the buying and selling of church offices. You want to be a bishop, that'll cost you. You want a cardinal's hat, bring gold. It was the original pay-to-play system. The pitch was seductive. Pay a massive upfront fee and you get a lifetime of passive income from church tithes. Who wouldn't want that? But there was a catch. To keep feeding the Borgia war machine, Rodrigo and his ruthless son, Cesare, needed more and more capital. When they ran out of existing offices to sell, they just invented new ones. They expanded the College of Cardinals, literally watering down the stock to raise instant cash. It didn't matter that it devalued the institution, because the risk, they thought, was handled by their absolute authority. It wasn't. Behind the curtain, a second layer of extraction was forming, indulgences. These were essentially get-out-of-hell-free cards. Pieces of paper stamped by the Pope, forgiving your sins for a price. It was the 15th century equivalent of printing money out of thin air, quantitative easing for the soul. They created a bizarre situation where people were emptying their life savings not for land or food, but for an invisible asset backed by nothing but a promise. At the heart of this system was the Pope himself. He was the referee, the bank, and the CEO. There were no regulators. The kings of Europe and the bankers of Florence played along because they were getting rich off the debt the Borgias were accumulating. Everyone was making money, so no one asked the hard questions. By the Jubilee year of 1500, the machine was overheating. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims poured into Rome, dropping gold at the altars. It looked like infinite prosperity. It was a massive, fragile bubble. And then the cash flow wasn't enough. War is expensive, and Cesare Borgia was conquering Italy. When they couldn't sell enough offices or indulgences, they turned to literal confiscation. Wealthy cardinals started dropping dead. Maybe it was a sudden fever. Maybe it was Cantarella, the infamous Borgia poison. It didn't matter. Because under church law, the Pope inherited the wealth of dead cardinals. The Borgias were intentionally crashing their own executives to liquidate their assets. It was a hostile takeover, with literal hostility. This wasn't just greed, it was a systemic monopoly. These weren't fringe players, they were the pillars of the European financial and political system. But a system built entirely on fear, extortion, and fake assets requires constant expansion. It requires constant victims. In August 1503, the music stopped. Rodrigo Borgia attended a banquet. Days later, he was dead. The architect of the empire was gone. Cesare, the brutal enforcer, fell deathly ill at the exact same time. The illusion of invincibility shattered overnight. Panic spread like wildfire through the halls of the Vatican. The wealth they had hoarded, pillaged instantly by rivals. The lands Cesare conquered, swallowed up by enemies. The Borgia Empire collapsed faster than Lehman Brothers. And here is the twist: the system survived. The Borgias were purged, but the machinery of unchecked papal wealth, of selling salvation, kept right on running until it triggered the Protestant Reformation. Centuries later, the dust has settled, but the core dynamics are identical. Only now we don't wear robes, and we don't sell indulgences. We sell toxic mortgage-backed securities. We print trillions in fiat currency to stimulate markets. The Borgias used the divine right of God to monopolize wealth and protect their insiders. Today, financial elites use complex algorithms, regulatory capture, and the promise of systemic stability. And it works if you're at the top. The insiders get richer. The fundamental imbalance between the rulers and the real world only grows. The Borgias crashed because they believed they could manipulate the rules of reality forever. Modern central banks and Wall Street titans operate on the exact same arrogance. Zero interest rates, endless bailouts, moving risk off the books and onto the backs of everyday people. They promise innovation while quietly repackaging old traps. Debt-fueled growth. Policymakers afraid to let bad ideas fail. Regulators outgunned, and everyday people left to pick up the pieces when the cycle breaks. So what can we learn from the financial empire of the Borgias? First, a monopoly on the rules is the ultimate danger. When one institution controls the currency, the laws, and the referees, the everyday person is just the product being farmed. Second, the bigger the illusion, the harder the fall. The Borgias seemed untouchable, backed by the highest authority on earth. But when confidence vanished, their entire empire evaporated in weeks. Third, financial awareness is survival. You don't need to be a Vatican insider or a Wall Street banker to protect yourself, but you do need to understand how the game is played. That means recognizing when an asset is fake. That means questioning the official narrative. That means asking every single time you hear about a new boom, a new bailout, or a new system. Who benefits, who bears the risk, and what happens when the music stops, because it always stops. The Borgia collapse wasn't an anomaly, it was a preview, a warning written in Renaissance gold. If you look closely, the same architecture of power is still in place today, just more digitized, more automated, and infinitely more fragile. And when the next shock comes, and it will, don't expect the system to save you. Expect a bailout for the elite, expect volatility, but don't expect justice. Not unless you understand what's actually happening behind the scenes. Real wealth isn't just gold or fiat money, it's knowledge, awareness, resilience. It's the ability to see the corruption before it peaks and know how to stand firm when it shatters. Because the system won't warn you, the authorities won't save you, but history will teach you if you're willing to listen. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand it, it'll crush you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The past left a trail, I'll show you where it leads.